Welcome to Behavioral Grooves, the podcast that explores stories, science, and secrets from the world's brightest thought leaders for the curious at heart. I'm Kurt Nelson.
And I'm Tim Houlihan. We like to explore human behavior that will improve your relationships, your well-being, and your organization by helping you find your groove. From best-selling authors to researchers, you will learn insights from the sharpest minds in behavioral science, including psychology, behavioral economics, and neuroscience.
Hey, Tim, we need to let listeners know that this is our 250th episode.
Yes!
All right, I know we have talked about it before, but in case you don't know, every single one of those episodes has been hosted on Podbean, and every single one of those episodes has been created with our unstoppable passion for behavioral science.
Yeah,
what do you think about
cool.
that?
I both are cool, but I think there's a couple of things that we should say about that. The first is that our passion, that passion that got this whole thing started and what keeps us going is all about applying behavioral science to improve our home life and our work life. And that passion comes through when we're talking to really cool guests like we have on this episode, but it's also in the researching, scheduling, producing, and promoting each and every episode.
And of course, Tim, that passion is also about sharing these episodes with the groovers who listen all around the world.
I couldn't agree more. And, and in the past few months, we've received the benefit of some additional passion in the form of Mary Califf, who works with us. Yeah, Mary works with us on all the phases of every episode, and we are so grateful for Mary's contributions.
So grateful, and you in particular, because, man, she does a lot of stuff, and it's fantastic. All right. Yes. So I think what Tim is leading up to is a really important point, though, that this idea that this passion that we have, hey, it takes time, it takes money. And if you would like to help us by putting a little emotional fuel in our engines, we would love it if you would post a review or give us a quick rating on whatever podcast service you listen to.
Yeah, and if you'd like to offset some of the hard costs, you can check out our Patreon site, and that link is in the show notes. We'd be super appreciative for your support.
And the second thing we wanted to bring up is this idea that, hey, Podbean has been a great host for us distributing our episodes. They have delivered every episode to Apple and to Spotify and over 100 other pod listening apps on iOS and Android. And we want to let you know that if you're thinking of hosting your own podcast, and we encourage everybody out there who is thinking about it, hey, first, give us a call, because we would love to help you set up and talk about the podcast and what it takes to do it and to do it properly. And then two, call Podbean. Make sure that you're on the best platform available.
Yeah. By the way, this is like a free call. Like, we just want to talk to people. We want to help people do it. This isn't like our side gig or something. Just
what?
To be clear.
We're not charging people for this information, this valuable insight that we have on the podcasting world. It's free?
No, it is free. We're just here to help, okay? Because it's part of our passion.
Oh, okay. All right. No, we are. And truly, we would love to hear from you, because we really do want you to succeed. And we love just talking about this stuff. So definitely drop us a line, and we'd be happy to give you the lip-smacking, sugary goodness that you'll need to record and publish your podcastable idea.
Wow. I actually didn't think you'd make it through that.
Well, maybe I didn't. And there you go.
I'm showering you with like banners of digital recognition right now.
Aw, thank you, Tim. All right. Maybe one of the best reasons we work well together is that at some level, we get each other, man. We get each other.
I guess at some level. Yeah.
Okay. So on to our episode for today. We are featuring a cool conversation we had with Mike Coleman. Mike is a co-founder, the director, and lead storyteller at Common Thread. Common Thread is a behaviorally based pro-social global design agency that works on projects including eradicating polio in a variety of countries, to helping to manage attacks on health workers in Pakistan, to a variety of other really cool initiatives that they do. Mike is based in Dublin and has an MA in journalism from the University of London.
Yeah. And aside from his amazing work, we also discovered that he's a very proud father of 2 girls and is a relatively bad guitar player. His words, by the way. But he's kind of just my style.
Hey, you are a relatively good guitar player. I am a absolutely bad guitar player. So he's well above me. All right. So we talked with Mike about his field of dreams approach to vaccine awareness in all sorts of non-weird places around the globe, and how facts and figures do a terrible job when it comes to trying to change someone's mind.
Yeah. We also talked to Mike about the book that he co-authored with Alison Zelkowitz of Save the Children, Channing Jiang of the Busara Institute, and it's called The Little Jab Book. And it gives 18 really specific, really clever, and really easy to follow tips on how to increase vaccine uptake. And all of it is based on, of course, behavioral science. It's a very cool book, and it's free.
Yes, it is. It's free, just like this show, Tim. Free. and they did it because of the passion that they have. So there you go. See, it all ties together. Ties together. All right. And we'll have a link in the show notes for you to check it out if you want. But right now, we encourage you to sit back with a warm cup of pro-social mindset and enjoy our conversation with Mike Coleman.
Michael Coleman, welcome to Behavioral Grooves.
Thank you so much. Really, really excited to be here.
We are particularly happy to have you here. Come on a long legacy of associations, and we're happy to continue to tie this knot in the pro-social world. But we're going to get started with the speed round. Coffee or tea?
Tea. I know I'm in the minority, but since being in Ireland, it's such a social lubricant, and it's a specific kind of tea. It's berries tea. We used to have it shipped to Vietnam even when we lived there. So.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Well, the expression, put the kettle on, a lot of things get the kettles on. So tea, I'd have to say.
I've never heard of tea as a social lubricant. So that's a first for me. That's great.
Now, Guinness is a social lubricant, but that's a whole different type. Yeah.
Different time of day, hopefully.
Different type. Yeah, hopefully is right. Okay. Would you rather have dinner with your favorite musician or your favorite sports star?
I think it would be musician. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think it would probably, do they need to be alive? I don't know.
They do not need to be alive on this aspect. We've had multitude of dead musicians come back to
Okay, good. The conversation is less interesting, I guess. Yeah, no, I'd sort of always imagined having dinner with Nina Simone and just having a chat.
Oh,
I feel like she'd be very frustrated with me and we'd have some intense discussions, but just a great admirer of her music and her life.
Yeah. Wow. That just opens up a whole round of thoughts and questions in my head that we're going to get to.
Tim is now going to be thinking the entire interview about what he's going to ask at the end.
No.
No. There you go. Nina Simone.
I meant Britney Spears. No. Can I go back? No.
I like the juxtaposition of that. That's awesome.
Would you rather be at a cabin on the lake or in the city?
1000% cabin on the lake. Yeah. I'm Canadian, so cabin on the lake is my happy place. And I have a little tiny off the grid shack about 4 hours north of Toronto. So it's, when I'm in the stressful moments, that's where I go, even in my own head.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to make you jealous, but Tim and I right now are at the cabin at the lake up in northern Minnesota. So we are together here recording for the first time and since pandemic began, but we're up here doing a writing retreat. So
looks beautiful.
Yeah. All right. Final speed round question. Are we as an overall behavioral science community, overall community in general, focused enough on applying behavioral insights into global health concerns and putting people at the center of global health?
Yeah, that's a big question. And I think...
Sorry, it's a speed round big question. It doesn't really go together.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great introduction to the conversation. I think, as I may go on about later, Common Thread was born out of sort of seeing that gap and seeing that need and seeing all these opportunities for behavioral science to really make an impact in the global public health space. And so I think there's plenty of room for behavioral science to have even more engagement and involvement in the space.
Well, tell us a little bit about how Common Thread started. You talked a little bit. You said, "All right, there's an inspiration there." So, what was that, and where did that begin?
Yeah, I won't go too far back, but I think we were, both my partner and I, Shireen Gergis, who we co-founded Common Thread about 3 years ago. We're working on what at the time was the largest global public health program in the world, the Global Polio Eradication Initiative, and just sort of seeing missed opportunities and a big gap between a kind of biomedical approach to the issue and a kind of, for lack of a better term, a sort of awareness raising, social mobilization, as it was called, approach, which was really, social mobilization was about working with communities in order to get them to vaccinate. So it was almost an extension of an awareness approach. And then seeing in the middle, this big space, this sort of vagaries of human decision-making live and all the complexity of context and culture. And we just sort of saw broadly, well, where there's a huge space for the social sciences in general. And, Pakistan was where I started my polio eradication career. And that's obviously a very complex place. And I arrived at a very complex time. And we both sort of found each other, Shireen and I, saying, well, this is really underexplored and underappreciated. And there's this sort of field of dreams approach to the program that if the service is well designed, if people know about it, then obviously they're going to take the vaccine. And of course, that's not the case.
Can you talk a little bit more about the complex times that you arrived in Pakistan? What was so complex about that?
Yeah, so I was originally invited to support the program and to support the response in Pakistan during a kind of media crisis where there was a particular news anchor who was making claims about the vaccine, that it was making children sterile and that it was, or worse. And within 2 weeks of arriving and getting off the plane, the Taliban had declared a ban on vaccination in the tribal areas of North and South Waziristan. Unfortunately, within a month of my arrival, there was the first attempted assassination of a health worker in Karachi. And by December, there were several, I think it was up to a dozen or so health workers who'd been assassinated just going about their jobs of vaccination. And so in the face of that kind of complexity, I think you really see the limitations of a kind of traditional approach and really trying to understand the sort of social cultural dynamics of particular populations and regions and the history and where resistance to immunization was more political than sincere resistance or was something other than a kind of refusal of the vaccination service. I mean, the Taliban, for example, had long facilitated vaccination teams into their territory, but there was some moment where it seemed kind of opportunistic. So anyway, so that was the kind of state that we, or at least I, arrived into a team and a program that was very mature and very capable, but I think we sort of felt ill-equipped to manage something as intense as that and making decisions before each campaign to say, well, these thousands of women vaccinators should go out and go door to door. As you might know, polio is in these eradication program is delivered as drops, and vaccinators go door to door with coolers on their shoulders. So there's no hiding who's a vaccinator and who's not, and going into areas, really, really bravely in many cases, where there was resistance or questions, and trying to support that program in that context was challenging, obviously. So that was the seed, and then from there, I think really trying to encourage a diversity of opinions, I think, and views about how can we do this better? How can we try to understand what people need, what people want, and what is their kind of culture and context to help make these decisions?
So take that to Common Thread today. What is the mission and how are you applying some of those ahas that you had gotten from the other work that you've done into what you're doing now?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think, understanding that Common Thread was sort of born out of this frustration, I suppose, we very quickly wanted to advocate for the social and behavioral, as we would call it at the birth of Common Thread, of being, evidence-based, that the decisions being made were based on data. We did, while still at UNICEF, actually, from Pakistan, I moved to New York and we worked with the Harvard School of Public Health's polling division to think about how we might measure trust and metrics of trust, which even back in 2015 was also was obviously such a critical issue to try to understand, and to start building, essentially an evidence base. So that was core. I think the other piece was really trying to make space for interdisciplinarity in the kind of problems we were trying to solve. So we have medical anthropologists, we have 2 behavioral scientists, we have human-centered designers, we have an economist. My background's in communication and political science, and having this diversity of opinion around the table, and designing models and approaches that hopefully draw the best from each to try to work out some of these tricky problems. And no one's hiring us for something easy normally, like we're like stunting in Tajikistan, increasing birth registration in Namibia and Ethiopia. We've worked on vaccine hesitancy. We've worked on misinformation stuff. It's having these really smart people around the table has been great and really, really inspiring for me anyway.
So with an evidence-based approach, we know collectively that evidence and facts don't necessarily change minds. What are some of the tools that you're bringing to bear? You talked about a broad variety of social scientists that are involved. Can you speak with a little bit more depth about how you go about influencing people with an evidentiary-based model?
Yeah, I mean, at the risk of stating the obvious, the first thing we look for when dealing with a client is what's the existing data? What is the sort of social data that you have available? And often with our partners, it'll be things like CAP studies, knowledge, attitudes, and practice studies. There might be some epidemiological data that can be, sort of used as a proxy for certain populations and some of their behaviors. Generally, we would seek to either do research with our partners. We have an applied anthropology partner that we work with a lot. So we do field research, qualitative research. If the budget doesn't allow, we try to do sort of rapid assessments, either in kind of rapid qualitative research with communities. And that could take the form of, sort of simple human-centered design methods like card sorting and just sitting with people, helping them map their experiences and their journeys to a particular service. And so we sort of, no matter what project we take, we're sort of insisting on having some discussion around what do we think we know. And increasingly having the confidence to say, well, we might be approached by a client to say, well, just design us a strategy to increase X and Y. And we'll say, okay, great. What do we know? And often there's no data. So I think that's, it sounds like a pretty obvious line, but it's a line that we're drawing to say, this is not going to be effective. It's not going to be useful. And on the other end of the scale is really trying to promote and insist on where it's possible, some testing of the interventions rather than, again, basing it on a certain level of assumptions and limited exposure even to the countries and contexts in which we work. So sort of a roundabout answer to your question. I hope that helps.
No, that's a great answer. You mentioned the word client. Can you talk a little bit about who is a client for you and who's providing funding and how do you go about getting that?
Yeah, so generally we're approached by organizations, a lot of international organizations like UNICEF, the Global Vaccine Alliance, the World Health Organization. We've done some work with the Gates Foundation, international NGOs like PATH. So, and then the client, it's sort of a not very specific term, but that usually leads to some work with local partners and government, often ministries of health. So UNICEF then becomes a kind of proxy for that relationship, which is often great because having real access to decision makers and the real complexity and the sort of challenges that they face, the barriers they face in doing their work is always really enlightening.
So on your website, you have a fantastic statement. I'm going to read it here. And it's this, is we humans are a complex bunch, fickle, erratic, contradictory, emotional. Some call these obstacles. At Common Thread, we call them catalysts. And once they're understood, a few small, careful nudges can move people to a positive change. So I love this idea of like getting this evidence in advance that you've just been talking about. Can you talk a little bit about, all right, I believe that you're getting what those catalysts are. So then how do you then go about utilizing those catalysts and nudging people around that?
Yeah, I think vaccination might be a good example. So there's often assumptions that, there's a limitation in people's knowledge. They just don't know. They need to understand the information and have higher awareness. what we tend to find is that people have other priorities. What's so often come up in the research. They have kids to take care of. They have jobs to go to. The clinic is, an hour, 2 hours walk away. They need to take the bus and need to find money to do that. When they get there, they're left waiting for 4 hours and there's nowhere to sit and there's nothing for their kids to play with. And, they get poorly treated by the health worker once they're finally in there, who doesn't necessarily answer their question. By the way, the health worker hasn't been paid in, 6 months, and then when they leave, they don't know what they're supposed to do next. So, those are the types of areas where we can say, listen, and you'll know this better than I do, that sometimes the friction, removing the friction can have the most impact. So, there's a lot of money and investment in thinking about messaging and thinking about public information materials. But frankly, if the service was better organized and better timed and more convenient and all those types of things, you would see a lot higher uptake in vaccination. So I guess it's a nice turn of phrase, but in the end, I suppose that's what it means, is really trying to understand what's really at the root of this problem and how can we influence it in hopefully simple, cost-effective ways, really, because these are obviously the contexts in which we're working are often, there's not a lot of money lying around. People are overworked and under-resourced, that type of thing. So, yeah. So I guess that's an example of how we would think about problems and then design around them. And, we've tried to experiment with limited success so far, but with just, can you make the waiting experience more pleasant? Can you throw a box of toys down for the kids? Can you paint the wall? Can you, organize the waiting area in a more sort of human friendly way, I suppose.
Yeah.
So those are the types of things that we're really keen to explore.
Well, Rory Sutherland from Ogilvy, who's talks a lot about this thing, talked about the channel between England and France and the multi-billions they were going to try to spend to increase or decrease the time by, 10, 15 minutes or something. He said you could spend a much smaller amount of that by just making that ride more enjoyable and people wouldn't mind. And to that point, I think what you're saying is let's figure out those pieces that are cost effective that can actually make a difference in how people behave and respond from that, not necessarily building a whole new rail system to get people and deliver them 10 minutes faster at the cost of, billions of dollars when, for, a couple $100, you could put playing cards on there or something else and
a decent
have them.
Cup of coffee or a berry's tea or whatever.
Berry's tea. There you go.
I'm not getting paid, by the way.
But maybe you should. Yeah. Maybe there you have a sponsor that you can talk to.
Well, now I'm going to have to check out Barry's tea.
I'll send you a box. No problem.
So you are the co-author of the Little Jab book with Channing Jiang and Alison Zelkowitz, who we have had as guests, and we are very, very fond of. Both of them are remarkable people. First of all, tell us a little bit about the book, because, well, I won't laud over it until you tell us a little bit about it. We loved it.
Oh, thank you very much. And you're right to say this was really like a great partnership between the Bussara Center for Behavioral Economics and Channing and Alison at Save the Children, who's just been this force of nature around, really, advocating for the behavioral sciences in this space. And Bussara, again, I could also laud over, who I think no one's doing better at applying behavioral science in the global South at the moment. So we were really, grateful to be invited to chip in with what we could. But bottom line, it was kind of, I suppose it was designed to demystify to a certain extent the behavioral science, how it could be applied to immunization. I think we saw relatively early on, I suppose, at the end of last year, that there was going to be a massive difference in the pace of the rollout of the vaccine between, lower and middle income countries and high income countries. And that this would be a long journey for low and middle income countries. And that's something I think that we wanted to make a contribution to really think about, how can we make this field accessible? How can we inspire overworked, stretched, health education people, our local partners, people working in immunization and routine immunization too. I don't know, I suppose give some practical advice and some thoughts about something that maybe from a distance can seem a little bit inaccessible. And as much as possible, tried to ground the examples in the same context. I mean, not exactly the same country, but try to draw from research from lower and middle income countries. So in the end, it was 18 kind of practical examples drawing from behavioral sciences and beyond, as you've probably seen, applied to kind of a immunization journey, like the planning and the pre-vaccination, the vaccination itself, and of course the post-vaccination and what happens afterwards. So yeah, that's where it came from, and we're really proud of it.
So who's the book intended for? Who is the main audience for the book?
It's quite broad in a way, and it's been really interesting to see who has approached us since, because it's really picked up quite a lot of interest. So there's been a lot of really positive feedback from those big organizations, from UNICEF, from WHO. It sits as one of their key resources for countries thinking about, the sort of social and behavioral aspects of immunization. I think initially it was designed for, country teams, and that can be a lot of different things. Usually it's a mix of those in the ministries of health and those that support them. Save the Children staff, UNICEF, WHO, some NGOs, people who have to make the immunization programs possible, and both in its promotion and in the delivery of it. So, yeah, that's mainly the audience, I think.
Well, you mentioned that it was designed from this perspective of low and middle income countries, and yet I can look at this and go, there are lots of high income countries that could use a lot of these insights that are from here, particularly being in the United States and a lot of the vaccine hesitancy that we're seeing here. Some of your specific examples are playing into some of the exact things that we're seeing. So I think it can be broadly accepted across many different areas. So I think that's good.
Well, I wanted to know, speaking of vaccine hesitancy, how often and how many vaccines is Bill Gates slipping microchips into the vaccines to, empower people to be robots or something?
Who told you? I mean, this is meant to be top secret.
Oh,
exposed.
Breaking news right here on Behavioral Grooves. Yeah, no.
Just to bridge to your last 2 points, though, I think what's been kind of interesting from the point of view of what we do and with the global pandemic that we're all facing is that those of us working in the field are, both kind of in it and trying to be valuable and useful in it, but we're also experiencing it ourselves, and there's this kind of moment of incredible kind of global empathy and learning in that, I don't know how your vaccine experience was, but we're all being exposed to the same messaging and protective behaviors and advice, whether you're in a refugee camp in Syria or you're in a cafe in California, the expectations are the same. We're asking the same behaviors, but obviously the flip side of that is it's just laid bare the massive inequity in vaccine access and the ability for the entire world to be protected at the same level. You have, I don't know where the rates are currently, but as of last week, something like 45% plus people in the US or North America more broadly were fully vaccinated. And, we're doing some work as part of this partnership with Busara and Save the Children in Nepal, Kenya, and Philippines as a start. And those vaccination rates are something like, I think Kenya's at 0.3% fully vaccinated. I think Nepal is something like 6%. I mean, the disparity is obscene in the context of countries like my own, like Canada, stockpiling vaccines, and other countries, just waiting for that supply. And then once that supply arrives, then of course you'll be dealing with, in those contexts, their own kind of misinformation and those barriers to vaccination, the behavioral barriers to vaccination that we've been discussing. So
could you expand on this? This is fantastic. And I'm really glad that we're getting to this. What do you think are the most critical barriers that we're facing? Is it structural? Nepal, the Philippines, my gosh, it's 0.6%. Is it structural? Is it supply chain? Is it perception? What do you think are the greatest inhibitors?
Yeah, it's, again, going to context, it varies from countries to country, of course. But I think, obviously the main barrier at the moment is just vaccine access. And even despite the COVAX vaccination facility, which is set up to help get vaccines to lower and middle income countries, there's a massive shortfall. Then we're seeing things like the impact of misinformation. As the Bill Gates, we did a misinformation project in West and Central Africa for the introduction of a new polio vaccine, actually. And that was a lot of social media listening and whatnot. And that Bill Gates rumor is very, very prominent. It's big. The other rumor that comes up a lot is, that Africans are being used as lab rats, essentially, that they're being experimented on. And these are the rumors that, as you know from research, that those rumors that have kernels of truth are those that are really the most challenging to inoculate against and to deal with. So, of course, there is a tragic history of some vaccine testing in Africa. There is a history in a place like Pakistan of the CIA, using a vaccination campaign, what might have seemed from a distance like sort of crazy ideas, and rumors actually have some kernels of truth. But then I think, to get more to the other barriers, I think there's also a feeling that it's in some places it's not a priority. There's other things they need to deal with. There's other vaccines or diseases, I should say, that are more important. That it's a kind of northern disease that may not be affecting people. And then, as you say, I think there is some very fundamental sort of service challenges. We saw some pictures from clinics in Ghana just yesterday, actually, where you have literally kind of hand-painted cardboard signs with a marker. It doesn't establish a lot of trust in people that this is a place where they're going to get a service of quality and that they can rely on. So there's mistrust in the vaccine. There's mistrust in the service providers. Where there's questionable relationships with government and with the local health officials. So these are challenges I think that we'll have to overcome if the world's going to be safe.
Well, and one of the things I like about the book at the beginning, and it goes back to what you were saying earlier in this conversation, is you have a great set of questions for people to use to ask themselves before even getting into this. It's kind of that finding the information, making sure we understand what's going on before we actually put a strategy in place. And some of the questions are, do they want to get this COVID vaccine? Do they feel they are at risk of getting COVID? Are they aware or interested in how many people around them are receiving the vaccine? And do they typically follow what others in the community are doing? All of these preset questions, again, from a behavioral science perspective, you're trying to get to the underlying root cause that you talked about earlier of whatever hesitancy they might have. How, and I might have just answered my own question here, but how do these questions, how do you see these being impacting what is actually getting done then? Is there a difference in all right, if they answer the question differently, do we have a different response? How does that work?
Yeah, I think the answer is yes. You'll see what we tried to do in the book was map some of those, say, diagnostic, self-diagnosis kind of questions to some of the 18 behavioral. So the barriers can be traced back in some ways once they're understood. So yes, I think what we're encouraging more and more, what we've always done in our work is that there's no cookie cutter approach to these things, and the granularity in these places is in any place really, is obviously can have an impact on how people receive information, their trust in local officials and government and services, their past historic experience with these things. It all really varies. So I think having an understanding of, as you say, what the kind of core barriers or core drivers of vaccination are is really fundamental to design a program, whether it's around just getting people there to the program, whether it's around kind of making the service more open, simple things like ensuring that the person delivering the vaccine speaks the language of the person who's receiving the vaccine, sort of understanding those aspects are so critical. So I'm not sure if that's exactly answering your question, but the short version is absolutely yes, we need to.
Yeah, I don't know if I actually had a good question in there. So you answered absolutely fantastically from
Great.
My long ramble that didn't actually make any question at the end.
I'm curious about what are your favorite projects that you're working on now?
Yeah, we're doing some work right now in, first of all, let me speak about the Busara and Save partnership, which by the way is called Vax Up, which is our catchy little little name for this partnership. VaxUp is working, as I said, doing some field work with Busara leading some field research, some rapid field research in Philippines, Nepal, and Kenya. And the idea is that we would then kind of co-create some interventions based on that data and roll them out and test them and do it in ways that are as rapid and as responsive as possible, which I think has been really interesting. And that's just getting started, but I think will allow for kind of localized little jab books and localized solutions that can be applied. So there'll be a Philippines version. There'll be essentially a playbook that countries can adopt and again try to make some of this research come to life. So there's that work. We're doing work with the in Central Asia and Eastern Europe with UNICEF on COVID vaccination demand, basically. And that's been really interesting, trying to understand each of those countries' unique problems. And there are things that are coming up regularly, are things like healthcare worker hesitancy. So healthcare workers don't want the vaccine, don't trust the vaccine.
Wow.
And if nothing else, we've seen the power of that moment of vaccination, that moment of personal connection. It's being like, if you get everything else wrong, but if you can get somebody to the clinic and have a positive interaction with someone who can answer your questions, show you a bit of empathy, tell you what happens next, and deliver the vaccine effectively, it's massive. It's huge. So when that person has concerns, is hesitant, isn't convinced, it's problematic, obviously. The other things that are coming up are related to reaching high-risk groups, so refugees, the Roma population in some countries in Eastern Europe and Central Asia, and sort of their unique needs and concerns, and trying to design programs that meet them. So that's been really interesting and exciting.
And the Roma population, is that forgive me if this, I don't mean to be use a incorrect term, but this is the gypsy population, basically. Yeah. This is a largely kind of moving, group of people in Eastern Europe. Is that?
Yeah, with their kind of unique culture, unique language, unique history, and a lot of prejudice and challenges. Kind of living a lifestyle that often doesn't necessarily mesh with the countries in which they're based. And many of them are stationary. They're not as mobile as maybe in the past. So I think that's a kind of a really interesting, and it's a great example of a specific population that requires a specific approach and research to really understand how this vaccination, in this case, COVID vaccination, can be better delivered and understood. Yeah, I don't know what else. We did some brief research on setting up a behavioral insights team in the Global South for Gavi, the Global Vaccine Alliance. Which was really, really interesting. And at the risk of stating the obvious, I think seeing how few, although it's changing, how few sort of dedicated behavioral science teams there were based in the Global South was something that was really obvious, but also hearing, I shouldn't say obvious, really, really striking. And reinforcing the whole kind of weird phenomenon that we were briefly touching on. I think what also did is just sort of confirm that some dedicated behavioral science expertise thinking about global public health and thinking about immunization is a real need.
I am super excited to hear you talk about the collaboration that you're having, VaxUp, right, with Busara and Save the Children. And just as you mentioned here, Busara, yourself, and Allison with her work are really bringing, I think, some of that behavioral science insight into a much needed area, as you've just talked about. And I think it's hopeful. It's promising. It's 10 years, after what's been happening here. And you kind of think what would have been or could have been if these things would have been implemented across the globe in a global fashion, as opposed to a North America, European centric fashion, which they have. And you wonder what difference that could have made. But I'm super glad that you are working on that now, and super excited to hear what happens over the next few years as you guys are working in the collaborations and just the individual research that you're doing. And I can tell that Tim is aching to talk about music at this point. You can't see his leg. It's just going up and down. He's like, can we talk about music yet? Can we talk about music? Yeah.
This was the part I was most nervous about. I told you. Yeah.
Well, let's just use your imagination for a minute here, Michael.
Okay.
Imagine you have been exiled to a desert island with a fantastic music production system, but you only get to take one body of work, one artist, one band along with you. Who's it going to be?
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Yes, of course.
All right. Okay. Yes.
They don't need to help me survive or anything. I don't need to think about physical strength. They're not building.
Fair enough. Yeah.
No?
They don't have to. No.
Okay.
It's just their collection of work that you have on your iPod or whatever it would be, and it's the only one that you have.
Maybe they contribute to your subjective well-being, but maybe
I don't know
not.
how strong they need it to be. That's all. Okay. Well, I would probably say I would enjoy the music and the company of someone like Jeff Buckley.
Oh.
I think I don't know how you found the whole kind of pandemic experience over the last year, but I've really found myself going back to music from when I grew up, and music that meant a lot to me at that time, and that certainly Grace, the album Grace was certainly one of them. Yeah, and I'm just worried I'm going to lose my Canadian passport if I don't say The Tragically Hip or something. So I'm gonna insert that as well.
I think it's better that you say Tragically Hip than like Bare Naked Ladies, personally. So I'm just gonna weigh in there.
Both of those are fantastic bands.
Some are more fantastic than others.
Gordon Down is a fantastic, and he left us too soon. And again, Jeff Buckley left us too soon.
Way too soon.
And kind of wish that there would have been more opportunity to have some more of his stuff. But I fully agree with either Jeff or the Tragically Hip. I would probably agree with Tragically Hip, maybe even a little more for me. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you ever listen to music while you work?
Oh, always. Yeah, always.
Oh,
yeah.
Wow.
I sort of, it's kind of a constant. It drives my wife crazy because I think she likes silence a little more than I do. But actually, one of the things we do at Common Thread is we set up a Spotify playlist with some of the countries that we work in. So we just have a contract with, Syria, Tajikistan, some of the other countries I mentioned, Ethiopia, and Namibia. We'll kind of scour the internet for music from those places and just, in some small nod to kind of understanding things a little bit or just immersing ourselves a bit in the place. It's been really nice actually that way.
Rob Burnett at Well Told Story in Nairobi leveraged, he's a big communication guy, and he really leverages the power of music and a DJ to reach young people, primarily in Nairobi, and actually created a character that Shoe Jazz is the name of this character that they use to kind of put the music out there. I think that it's a really cool thing. So I'm glad you're connecting that way.
And I love the concept of trying to get that playlist from those different locations because music does have an insight. I think it brings an insight for people into a little bit of that culture. It's not a be all end all, but it does help in grounding people in, hey, this is what they're listening to. This is the sound. This is the stories that they're telling with that music. And that can bring a good lens into what's going on. So I applaud that. And I'm sure Tim and I can probably groove on that for an entire session. So
hell yes.
Come join our playlist. You're welcome.
Oh, there you go.
Michael, thank you so much. It has been our pleasure to have you as a guest on Behavioral Grooves.
Really, really enjoyed the chat. Thanks so much, Sean. Thanks.
Welcome to our grooving session where Tim and I groove on what we learned from our discussion with Mike, have a free-flowing conversation, and talk about whatever else comes into our unchanging minds.
Oh man, I wish I was more changing. I really do.
You are one of the most changing people I know. I mean,
I
you change your shirt every day. It's amazing.
Yeah, but not my shorts.
That's too much information. Too much information.
But there is that, we were talking to Andy Norman earlier today about the importance of entering conversations with an open mind and the willingness to learn and the desire to learn and to take on new information. Gets back to that John Kenneth Galbraith comment about when I encounter new information, I change my mind. What do you do?
Yeah.
There's this wonderful thing. And there's a part of me that sort of wishes I was updating my Bayesian bases on a more regular basis. I don't know if I'm doing it frequently enough, I suppose is my question.
Yeah, I think the piece that really got to me with Mike's conversation is that this idea that evidence and facts don't change minds. We know that. We've talked about this. We've had this conversation multiple times. But damn, that makes it hard to really get people aligned around truth and objectivity and science, all of those things, which just makes me sad. It makes me sad.
It's a big blind spot, isn't it? That for some reason we think that facts and figures really aren't going to change my mind, but they'll change your mind. Like if I just compile the right figures and the right evidence, that I can change your mind. But if you bring evidence and facts to me, it's like, no, that's not going to work. I don't believe that. I don't like, go back to the messenger effect. That's not from the right person or the right source, or that's not from the right organization or whatever. And I can so easily dismantle that. And yet we somehow have this blind spot that it's going to work on you. If I just bring you the right evidence, that of course you'll change your mind.
See, I actually think the opposite. I think that we believe that I believe at least that if I'm shown facts and figures, that I have an open enough mind that I will change, that I will. I am not one of those ignorant people who won't be changing because the information doesn't agree with my pre-held beliefs, right? I am an angel above, as they say.
I can see your halo, yeah.
Yes, and the fact of the matter is I know that all these idiots out there, that I could give them the best advice ever and lay these facts out in a way, and yet they're not going to take it. So I think there's two ways about that. Yes, we continue to try to change people with facts and figures, and knowing that doesn't work, but we believe somehow it will. And this idea that, I'm going to be more open to those facts and figures and changing my mind. And in reality, we're not, because we're human just like everybody else. So
yeah. Okay. I also wanted to talk about the things that Mike talked about, vaccine hesitancy, and how it comes in all kinds of shapes and sizes. And I thought this was really good. It was a good reminder for me, because it's not just someone, this isn't a homogenous group of people that say, I don't want a vaccine because of a single reason. It's a big group of people with a lot of different reasons. And so that makes it's a good reminder that we're not just big homogenous blobs of social norms. There's a whole bunch of social norms going on here.
Well,
and we need to think about that when we're communicating.
And I think what it did for me is it reminded me, because too often I fall into this trap of, your vaccine hesitancy, you must be a right-wing nut job who is a science denier and anti-vaxxer who believes that the earth is flat. And you get lumped into all of these other, negative stereotypes that I have on people who won't take their vaccine. And what he brought to light is, sometimes people are just busy. Sometimes there is a valid concern. Sometimes it's about, I can't get there. I have kids and a job, and I can't. When am I going to be able to get a time off in order to go get a vaccine? And, if it's any indication of, I'm just trying to go get a test, and the amount of freaking information I have to enter in and the amount of time that it takes, it's just wearing me out, much less doing that to try to get your vaccine shot. So it was a nice reminder to not just lump everybody together that isn't vaccinated, because there are a multitude of different reasons. Although for many of them, they're just idiots, and that's all it is. So there you go.
It's good that you're so non-judgmental about all this. That's way to go, Kurt. It also reminds me of, we saw Katie Milkman's post this morning on her paper about how vaccine lotteries are, at least in the United States, are not having the desired effect.
Yeah.
And so it's like, okay, so all these really cool ideas, they need to be tried. And some that we try aren't going to be as successful as we hope them to be.
Which is the wonderful thing about science, right?
Yes.
It is the idea that we test these. And so I'm not holding on to this belief, because I had the belief. I'm going, well, of course lotteries are going to work. They're going to work on a number of things. They're going to be your personal aspect of greed that I can potentially win. I mean, look at the people that play, your everyday daily lotto and, spend money in order to have the potential to win. Well, this should do the same thing, or provide an excuse for people who are kind of on the fence, but they're in a group that has a negative perspective of this. So you could justify it by doing this. And that's the belief I had going into it. But looking at that data, or at least from the findings that they had, that didn't really work. So I need to adjust my viewpoint on this.
Wow. There it is. New data, new opinion. That's fantastic. It was a great conversation. Love talking to Mike. That's really where I want to come back on it. So
yeah, and the other only thing that I loved the idea of this field of dreams approach, right?
Oh yeah,
that if we just build it, then people will come. If we just make them aware of the vaccine and all its wonderful glory, that will definitely make sure that people are going to want to take it. And that's just not true. And as much as I would like to believe in a world where those facts and figures do change people's minds, knowing that they don't means that we need to be thinking about things in a manner that is reflective of reality and not of a make-believe field cut out of the corn in the middle of Iowa, where, by the way, the White Sox and I forget who else they just played a real Major League Baseball game, but hey.
They did. Along those lines, there is one other thought that has been on my mind recently about the idea that changing a mind, like changing my mind or changing your mind, doesn't have to mean going from 0 to 100 or 180 degrees on the curve. Changing your mind can be going from 20 degrees to 25 degrees.
Yeah.
Changing your mind might be going from 80% positive and confident about something to 60% positive and confident about something. Those are mind-changing events. And kind of getting back to the way Annie Duke talks about thinking in bets, we can think about changing our mind or influencing others to change their minds in small increments. It doesn't have to be all or nothing.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting piece. And again, with our conversation this morning with Andy that we had, again, it'll be a future episode for people, the idea of having doubt and this idea that we don't have to fully go from 0 to 100, but even if you just instill a little bit of doubt in somebody about their pre-held incorrect belief, that kernel of doubt might be enough that if they see additional information, if they find out new things or talk to other people, that kernel can grow and actually at some point change them from being a vaccine, hesitant, somebody who's not going to get it, to being somebody who says, yes, I understand that I need to get this and do it. So it's not this hopeless piece. It just doesn't happen fast.
Agreed.
All right. And with that, I think that pretty much wraps up another long-winded grooving session for us, Tim.
Well, this friend of mine used to quip to me that he'd ask me a question and I'd give him a pageant.
What kind of pageant? What is a pageant?
It's just a great image. I just love that image when he would say, I ask you a question, you give me a pageant. I don't know.
Well, and this was a great pageant. There you go.
There you go. Yes, it was. Okay, maybe we should just quickly recap a couple of things that we thought were maybe most usable and most applicable from our discussion with Mike. Like, when we think of changing someone's mind, you can forget about overwhelming them with the facts and the figures. Like, just start with compassionate curiosity, right? Try to understand the way that they acquire their information and what kind of reliability of their sources are, right? And have a conversation, I think is probably a good thing to think about.
And if you can, as you said earlier, it's not going from 0 to 100. It's maybe just changing it a little bit. It's planting that seed of doubt in this strongly held incorrect belief that they have. And this idea that vaccine hesitancy isn't a one-size-fits-all problem, just like every other behavioral issue. If you want to design a behavior change initiative, you've got to look at how you can influence the largest percentage of the population with the interventions that you have available, and just keep working away, keep chunking away little by little by little. And yeah, it feels really hard, but man, just keep at it. Keep doing it because it's
Absolutely.
really, really, really important.
Yeah, agreed.
Okay. With that, let's end this episode of Behavioral Grooves. And as always, thank you. Thank you for listening. We truly appreciate you spending time with us, and we hope that you've learned something. Now, we hope that you take this week and you go out and you find your groove.